February 22nd, 2026. In the gated silence of Tapalpa, the hunt for the world's most wanted man reached its violent crescendo. As federal troops breached the compound, the mountains of Jalisco screamed to life with high-caliber fire. A military helicopter, crippled by cartel rounds, spiraled toward an emergency landing in Sayula. Amidst the chaos, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, fled into the forest undergrowth, pursued by elite special forces into a final, bloody confrontation. Born into the dirt of Culotitlan, the boy who would become the world's most elusive ghost began his life in 1966. Whether he was christened Ruben or Nemesio, the man behind the myth was a creature of 1,000 shifting names. He drifted through the underworld as Acerguera or Mendoza, a shapeshifter scrubbing his past to protect his future. Some say he took the name Nemesio to honor a godfather, a final act of loyalty before he chose a darker path. To the world, he was simply El Mencho, a name that would eventually command a global empire of terror. But in the cockfighting pits of Michoacan, they called him the Lord of the Roosters, a nod to his brutal, blood-stained passion. The son of avocado farmers, he grew up in a landscape where poverty was the only thing that grew faster than the crops. Flanked by 5 brothers, the Oseguera Cervantes boys learned early that the law was a luxury their family couldn't afford. He abandoned his desk in the 5th grade, trading a primary school education for the harsh reality of the harvest. By 14, the boy was no longer picking fruit. He was standing guard over the hidden green gold of marijuana plantations. Driven by a hunger for more than the fields could offer, he slipped across the border into the neon sprawl of 1980s California. In the shadows of the North, he wore aliases like armor. Ruben Avila, Jose Lopez Prieto, a ghost moving through a foreign land. By 1986, the San Francisco Bay Area became the proving ground for a 19-year-old with a stolen gun and a desperate heart. 2 months into his first stint behind bars, his first child was born, a father behind glass, tethered to a life he couldn't leave. In the quiet suburbs of Redwood City, the DEA believes he found his true calling, the high-stakes alchemy of methamphetamine. Alongside his brother-in-law, El Queenie, he began weaving the threads of a multi-billion-dollar criminal tapestry. A 1989 narcotics bust sent him back to Mexico, but the pull of the American dream, or its darker twin, brought him back to the Bay. By September 1992, the federal government finally closed the net on him in a Sacramento courtroom. The setup went down at the Imperial Bar, a 5-ounce heroin deal that smelled of betrayal from the very first word. While his brother Abraham handled the product, a 26-year-old Mencho stood sentry, his instincts sharper than the street. He felt the trap before it sprung, noticing the undercover cops handed over stacks of bills that were far too perfect to be real. A police wiretap captured his frantic warning, a desperate plea for his brother to walk away from the ghosts in the room. The law was faster than the warning. 3 weeks later, the Oseguera brothers were facing the crushing weight of federal justice. In the courtroom, he maintained a mask of innocence, claiming the undercover agents were weaving a fiction of his involvement. But the math was simple and cruel. If they both fought the charges, his brother, a repeat felon, would never see the sun again. Facing a jury meant a guaranteed conviction, so Mencho made a calculated sacrifice that defined his cold, tactical loyalty. He pleaded guilty to save his blood, trading 5 years of his life for his brother's freedom in a Texas federal prison. Locked away in Big Spring, he sat among the undocumented and the forgotten, a kingpin in waiting, counting the days. Paroled at 30, he was cast back across the border, a man with a prison education and a hole where his future used to be. He didn't return to the fields. Instead, he donned a badge, infiltrating the police forces of Cabo Corrientes and Tomalan. But the uniform was just another alias, a front he discarded to join the Milenio cartel as a full-time architect of chaos. To seal his fate, he married into the Valencia clan, wedding Rosalinda to anchor his bloodline to the heart of the syndicate. Within that circle of fire, the former lookout and avocado picker finally rose to become the undisputed titan of the new generation. Within the Milenio cartel, the man once known as a lookout began his ascent as a silent shadow in El Maradona's elite hit squad. But the arrest of his boss in 2003 shattered the hierarchy, and the rising tide of Los Zetas forced a desperate retreat into Jalisco. Exiled in Guadalajara, El Mencho didn't just survive. He forged a lethal pact with Nacho Cornell and the titans of the Sinaloa cartel. Under the wings of El Chapo's allies, he became the invisible hand managing the blood, the books, and the bullets of a growing empire. The fall of El Lobo and the death of Coronel in a 2010 military raid left a vacuum that El Mencho was more than ready to fill. As the Milenio cartel fractured under the weight of its own losses, the former avocado picker moved to seize the crown for himself. Internal friction turned to fire when a rival faction backed El Pilo, while the loyalist Eric Valencia pushed for Mencho's absolute rule. A blood debt in Tecumán became the final straw. When the rival bloc refused to hand over a killer, the streets of Colima ran red. The cartel split in two. The old guard formed La Resistencia, while Mencho's loyalists became the terrifying Los Matazetas. Accusations of betrayal sparked a scorched earth war for the smuggling routes of Jalisco, a conflict where no one was left standing. To win the hearts of the haunted, Mencho launched a propaganda war, painting himself as a protector against the very extortion he perfected. Victory was absolute. The Zeta killers evolved into the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG, a name that would soon paralyze a nation. As the undisputed leader, he expanded his borders through a brutal cocktail of territorial conquest and high-level political corruption. What began as a splinter group exploded into a global syndicate, cementing El Mencho as the state's most wanted ghost. His fame was forged in the fires of public horror, using sensationalist violence to earn the title of principal enemy of the Mexican state. As the old lords of the drug trade fell to prison or the grave, the path was cleared for a new, more aggressive breed of kingpin. He turned Jalisco into a fortress, repelling the incursions of the Knights Templar and Los Zetas with military-grade precision. From the highlands of Guanajuato to the ports of Colima, he built a bastion for a new addiction, the industrial production of meth. His grip tightened over 8 states, a territorial stranglehold that only the sprawling urban maze of Mexico City could momentarily resist. Beyond the borders, his reach stretched to every corner of the globe, from the streets of Los Angeles to the markets of Asia and Africa. Focused on the high-profit margins of cocaine and meth, he transformed the CJNG into a criminal machine of unprecedented scale. With an estimated $50 billion in assets, he didn't just run a cartel, he ran a shadow economy alongside his brother-in-law, El Queenie. Even after the capture of his closest ally in 2015, Mencho's tactical genius allowed him to pivot as quickly as the market's demand for heroin. By 2019, the DEA's lead hunter estimated the man's personal fortune at $1 billion, a ghost with the wealth of a small nation. In 2012, a rural tip led federal forces to a quiet community in Tonaya, sparking a firefight that nearly brought the myth to an end. Initial reports whispered of his capture, but as the smoke cleared, the government was forced to admit the target had slipped away. Reports suggested the U.S. had tracked him through his inner circle, a high-stakes game of surveillance that ended in a forest standoff. To cover his retreat, the CJNG turned Guadalajara into a war zone, setting 37 vehicles ablaze to paralyze the city's arteries. The strategic blockades worked with terrifying efficiency, trapping reinforcements while the kingpin vanished into the Jalisco brush. In 2015, an ambush in Ocotlan left 11 dead, a bloody testament to the lengths his men would go to protect their leader's secret meetings. When his associate El Gringo fell in a shootout, Mencho didn't mourn. He declared a total war against the federal police. Ambush followed ambush, including a high-stakes hit on Jalisco's security commissioner that turned the state into a combat zone. On a single road in San Sebastian, 15 officers were slaughtered in a hail of lead, the deadliest day for the police in a decade. The chief of Zacoalco fell next, a message written in blood that the CJNG owned the ground the police walked on. In May 2015, the government launched Operation Jalisco, a massive military surge designed to finally put the kingpin in a cage. Intelligence placed him in Tonaya, but as the army closed in, they realized they weren't walking into a raid, but a full-scale battle. In the village of Villa Purificacion, the unthinkable happened. A rocket-propelled grenade brought down a military helicopter. As 9 soldiers died in the wreckage, the state of Jalisco erupted in fire, with 56 separate arson attacks spreading like a plague. While banks and gas stations burned, El Mencho used the smoke as a screen, slipping once more into the safety of the rural mountains. He became a phantom of the highlands, moving between the rugged terrains of Michoacan and Nayarit, never sleeping in the same bed twice. His inner circle was no longer just thugs. They were mercenaries with military training, a tier of steel between him and the law. Unlike the flashy lords of old, he lived a modest, disciplined life in the shadows, a quiet existence that kept him off the radar. The DEA tracked his evolution from a local dealer to a global architect, moving shipments through a dozen countries with ease. They watched as his operations moved from the jungles of Colombia to the ports of Australia, leveraging triads to move his product. By 2011, the price on his head began to climb, a multi-million-dollar bounty for a man accused of every crime in the book. Indicted in D.C. for running a continuing criminal enterprise, he was officially named the architect of a transcontinental drug bridge. Even a 17-year-old YouTube star wasn't safe from his reach. A viral insult led to a public execution in a Jalisco bar. The bounty surged to $30 million as the DEA and Mexico joined forces to dismantle the financial heart of the new generation. By 2018, the U.S. government doubled the reward to $10 million, one of the largest sums ever offered for a single head. By late 2024, the price for the world's most elusive kingpin hit a staggering $15 million, a testament to his enduring power. The U.S. Treasury struck at his wallet, freezing assets, and blacklisting the web of businesses that laundered his blood money. From sushi restaurants to tequila brands, the CJNG's tentacles were found buried deep in the legitimate economy of Jalisco. Family members and attorneys were swept up in the sanctions, an attempt to isolate the kingpin from the very people he trusted. Under the second Trump presidency, the label changed. El Mencho was no longer just a drug lord. He was a global terrorist. Internal betrayals met a brutal end. When El Cholo turned against him to form a rival cartel, he was marked for a slow death. Even after a failed assassination, the hunter didn't stop until El Cholo was found dead on a park bench, wrapped in plastic. But as the war raged outside, a silent enemy was growing within. Rumors of a failing kidney and a secret hospital in the hills. The lack of sightings fueled 1,000 theories that he was dead, dying, or a ghost. But the truth remained hidden in the forest. The end began not with a gunshot, but with a whisper of data. A joint task force of the Mexican Army and U.S. intelligence began mapping a ghost, using a strategy usually reserved for high-value terror targets like Al-Qaeda. By February 20th, 2026, the net was closing around an upscale gated community in the hills of Tapalpa. The trail followed a trusted associate, leading straight to a residence where the Lord of the Roosters was hiding with a skeleton crew of just 10 men. Under the cover of darkness on February 21st, 6 military helicopters were moved into position, humming silently in the states bordering Jalisco. By dawn on the 22nd, the silence of the Tapalpa Country Club was shattered as federal boots hit the pavement on foot. As the ground teams advanced, 2 helicopters dropped from the clouds, providing a lethal eye in the sky. The response from the CJNG was instantaneous. A wall of high-caliber fire meant to repel the state at any cost. In the opening minutes of the assault, the compound became a graveyard for the men who stood in the way of the mission. Seeing his empire crumbling, Mencho fled into the rugged brush with 4 of his most loyal shadows. An elite team of special forces split off, a high-stakes hunt through the pines that triggered a second, more desperate confrontation. Cartel gunmen fought with a suicidal intensity, striking a military helicopter and forcing it into a jagged emergency landing in Sayula. But there was no escape. Soldiers found the kingpin crouched in the forest undergrowth, where a final exchange of fire left him critically wounded. As the smoke cleared, the forest floor was littered with armored trucks, long rifles, and the charred tubes of rocket launchers. A medevac was called in to pull the dying kingpin, his bodyguards, and a wounded soldier toward the hospitals of Guadalajara. But the man who had survived 1,000 battles couldn't survive the flight. Mencho took his last breath 10,000 feet in the air. Fearing the city below would burn if they landed, officials diverted the corpse to Morelia, a mid-air pivot to keep the trophy from the hands of his followers. Secretary Ricardo Trevilla Trejo would later confirm the cost of the kill. 8 cartel members dead and a nation on the brink. The retaliation was a masterpiece of chaos, with 250 burning blockades paralyzing 20 states across the republic. From Michoacan to Sinaloa, the CJNG used hijacked trucks as funeral pyres for their fallen leader. In Puerto Vallarta, the tourist paradise turned into a hellscape of burning gas stations and shuttered shops. Governor Pablo Lemus declared a code red as Guanajuato vanished under the smoke of 60 separate arson attacks. Banks were smashed and OXXO stores looted, a coordinated strike designed to show the state that the cartel still ruled the streets. The violence turned inward on the authorities, with an IED detonating at the gates of a National Guard base. In San Juan de los Lagos, a car bomb claimed the life of a National Guard captain, a signature of El Sapo's brutal tactical hand. The chaos reached the prisons. In Ixtapa, a vehicle rammed the gates like a medieval battering ram, freeing 23 inmates in a storm of gunfire. Foreign embassies scrambled, issuing shelter-in-place orders, as the world watched Mexico descend into a state of war. From London to Jakarta, the warnings were the same. The ground was no longer safe for anyone. In Guadalajara, the irony of the unrest was captured in a single image. 1,000 tourists stranded overnight inside the city zoo. By the time the sun set on February 22nd, the body of Mencho arrived at the AICM in Mexico City under a forest of federal bayonets. Forensic teams worked through the night, using genetic markers to confirm that the ghost of Calotitlan was finally, truly gone. 3 days later, a legal representative for the family reclaimed the remains, bringing a formal end to the man's legal existence. But the death of a kingpin is rarely the end of the story. It is the beginning of a vacuum. With his son, El Menchito, behind bars in the United States, there was no heir to the throne of iron. Now the world waits for the violent realignments, the inevitable war for what remains of the new generation.